So welcome everybody to another episode of Coaching Outdoors. I am Anna Marie and I am joined by my co-host Alex, and today we have our coaching practitioner special guest Rachel Woods. And before I ask her to introduce herself, I have to say this is our second attempt at an interview, unfortunately. It was really lovely to catch up with Rachel in person last month down at Alfred's Tower, because we live in a similar neck of the woods down in Wiltshire. Though unfortunately Mother Nature was not being particularly helpful with the wind. So this is attempt 2. So thank you so much, Rachel, for your patience and openness to kind of come back and have a second conversation. And I would love it if you could introduce yourselves to our listeners.
Thanks, Anna Marie. And yeah, she definitely did want her voice heard more than ours, I think, when we met. Remember, we were losing the light, and yeah, listening to the wind over the top of us was not comfortable, I think, on the recording. So it's very, very nice to be here, and thank you for having me. My name is Rachel Woods. I run a business called Coach in Nature, which I launched in April of this year with my epic timing. I take executives, teams and small business owners out into nature, or using the metaphors of nature in an indoor setting when my business partner, Mother N, is having one of the days like she is potentially having, well, you are, Alex, at the moment. So when the weather's inclement, we can use metaphors and visualization, noises to support the coaching experience and bringing nature into the experience within a more dry, warm setting when we need to.
It's lovely to see you, Rachel. And we were actually saying just before we started recording today that I realised just before the call that Rachel and I actually studied together at Henley Business School back at the beginning, back in 2013, and we did our PCIC qualification together. And it's one of those, we were saying, for us, it's interesting because neither of us were already thinking about the world of outdoor coaching at that point. We were training, entering the world of becoming coaches and qualified coaches, and we both ended up following that route. So it's a really interesting, slightly different pathways, but a really interesting journey for us both. Rachel, it'd be lovely if you could share with our listeners your first memories of being outdoors and why you love the outdoors yourself so much.
Yeah, well, I've always been, I suppose, slightly feral. As a kid, I was always outside in ditches and climbing trees, making mud pies, got into horses. So the outdoors has always been big in my life. But in terms of coaching, you're right, the certificate in coaching didn't take me there. We did a little bit of work outside, but it was nice to do rather than it ever factored in my work. When I started the MSc, Henley's MSc in Coaching and Behavioural Change in 2015, I think this was, I remember the intro day, and Alison Hardingham was running a demo session on some of the techniques and tools that we were to be playing with and using. And she did something called the Disney method, which is where Walt Disney famously would have different hats, different days he came in. They never knew what version of him they'd get. It's either a pragmatist, a dreamer, or a skeptic. So he'd either rip things apart, or he'd have all these crazy ideas, or he'd have some very sensible ones. And what this does, it puts you in these different positions. So she basically picked me, or picked on me, depending on your point of view, and said, right, where do you want to be while you're the dreamer? And I was drawn to the window. So I said, let's go out there. I want to be looking at the trees. Okay, and we started talking. I said, look, I'd really like a small holding. I want to spend more time outdoors. I want ducks and donkeys. That was the dream. Saw the skeptic. Well, that was by some wood paneling. That's where the bank manager lives. That's the thing that says I can't afford this. That's my cynicism kicking in. And then she dragged me across to see the pragmatist, to find that middle ground and what was possible, what might be realistic and achievable for me. And it's sort of, that was the little stone at the top of the hill that someone was prodding. And I don't know why I'm doing this with my finger, no one can see me. That little stone got tipped off the top of the hill and started rolling. And over the sort of 2 or 3 years of the MSc, it just gathered momentum. It picked up a load of moss. It picked up a load of stuff with it. And I got to the end of the MSc. My dissertation was about being outdoors. And that was it. I got to the point where I convinced myself, not why would I coach outdoors, but why would I coach indoors? And that's where, yeah, that's that's where I am now. I'm much happier outside.
And it's been a real pleasure and privilege hearing different coaches' backstories and discover what has triggered them to work within the outdoor space. And that example there is so tangible. It's a real moment that you can kind of really trace it back to, and how that's ultimately kind of shifted your entire career path within the coaching world. And it would just be great to have a little insight into how has it gone from there in kind of building and developing your business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I launched in April of this year, so clearly my timing was impeccable, just as lockdown was hitting. But ultimately, I've come from an HR background, so I had a decent career in HR, 10 years or so, and then some. And I'd got to the point where I didn't feel like I was aligned with my purpose. I didn't feel like it was a nice job. I'd fallen into that safe trap where the job's really lovely, it pays really well, and I don't leave. And that was a bit of a stressor for me, and I wasn't feeling like I was being really genuine to myself, or something was missing. And I had this qualification, I'd done the MSc, I'd spent lots of time outside, I'd been coaching, and I just thought I need to do more of this. Had an opportunity, and not a lot of people see redundancy in the opportunity, but for me it was. I was made redundant, and I said, right, that's it, I'm with, not now. Yeah, when? So I did it. I took the step. Obviously, then COVID hit, which has given me lots of time outside because, you know, there's not much else to do for a while. And yeah, it's building, taking that thread, which I think has always been there, as I mentioned, you know, as a kid through to being a horsey girl, and even through my working career, there's always been that little thread that's run through my life. And I joke about what colours your thread, what's it made of. Mine's sort of Hessian, very natural looking and a bit frayed around the edges, or it's baler twine, or it's something that's really kind of, you know, just down to earth and robust. And it's always been there, and that was something that was tugging me. And I've never felt, I've got to say, more aligned between who I am and what I do than when I started this business. Even though it's been slow to get going, as you can imagine. You come out of HR, you move into coaching, you put yourself out there commercially as a coach. You're not known for that. At that point in time, nobody knows you for that activity. So you then have to build that that awareness. And the beauty of nature, I think, is she's so easy to photograph, to get images, to use metaphors, to tell stories about, genuinely, because you can be there in it, doing it. So when I looked at more on my platforms and trying to get out there on social media and all this stuff, somebody said to me, your Instagram doesn't look any different. I said, what do you mean? Well, it's always been full of trees and stuff. So what's different now? I'm like, okay, that says I'm doing the right, that tells me I'm on the right path. And then it was about, okay, now how do I convince clients? How do I attract those clients in the first place? Make sure they're the right ones that want to work with me. I can be useful to them, which is a massive value of mine. If I can't be useful, I don't want to do it. And persuade them then that this is a nice idea, this is a good thing to do. And actually, COVID's been kind of helpful on that front, purely because one of the things you were allowed to do is go out walking with one other person. And you could distance, like when you and I went out, Anna-Marie, that was perfectly safe. And the wind would have carried all sorts away, wouldn't it? So, so yeah, that's kind of where I've got to now.
There's some great stuff in there. And just thinking about what you were just saying there about COVID, Anna-Marie and I've talked about this quite a few times, about hopefully next year and into the years to come, people will have realised the benefits of being outdoors and having time and space outdoors to help to, you know, from a mental and physical well-being perspective. But hopefully this time that we've had just over this last year, people who maybe wouldn't have necessarily wanted to go outdoors would have felt that pull, because actually it you know, being cooped up inside has been something that none of us, or particularly probably us three, would want to experience for very long. One of the things that you brought into the conversation just then, which it's a really great segue actually into one of the topics that we wanted to talk to you about, was this idea of connecting with nature and bringing nature into the coaching conversation, and having, you mentioned the words metaphors and that sort of thing. So it would be really great to understand a little bit about how you personally connect with nature and help your coachees to utilise nature within the coaching conversation, and make that connection, what sort of tools and techniques that you use to really bring nature into that coaching conversation?
Yeah, it's something that's evolving all the time, as you can imagine. I think it started off quite simplistically using the metaphors about roots and ecosystems, and the trunk of a tree being that sort of solid core and yet flexible that can bend and not break in the different weather systems and climatic things that are happening, in the same way that businesses should have that element of flex but still have that core, and linking that to values and things. After a while, it didn't seem trite, and a lot of clients really engaged with that, but I think to me it felt a little bit superficial. It felt a little bit, I'm doing this just to put a green spin on normal coaching activities and methods. So I started looking a little bit deeper, and weirdly, I'm probably the only, I don't know, someone will challenge me on this, I may be the only coach that talks about fungal root networks. Because I got a bit obsessed with mushrooms in the middle of the year. It was sparked off by a friend of mine, Tashbai, who's also made redundant at the same time as me. She's the strategy doctor now. She's gone and set up her own business. She's amazing. But she's also a stand-up, really brave, took this leap, went into stand-up comedy. And she was doing this skit around mushrooms and how the bit you see of a fungus is the mushroom, in really simplistic terms. And that's basically the reproductive organ of the fungus. So it's a bit rude to call it to call the fungus a mushroom, basically, because that's where the spores live and all the rest of it. So of course I giggled a bit at that. I thought, oh, that's funny. But then I got reading The Secret Life of Trees, and I started reading more, and it's just the fungal network underground is the conduit that trees use, or that aids trees to communicate with each other. The electrical signals, the chemical signals couldn't happen but for these fungal networks that live in and amongst the roots. And like, wow, and I suddenly thought about, okay, organizations, ecosystems, what are the things that grease the wheels of the communications between the different, we talk about silos, and that's quite cliche to talk silos, and functions and communication between functions, but what's happening, those gaps in between, what's easing that movement. And there's a couple of my clients I was talking to about this, and they went, oh yeah, actually we've got some blockers there. There's a little bit of a joke running around, okay, we clearly need some fungus now in those gaps. But it highlighted for them that there was something wrong in the system where there were miscommunications or missed communications, purely because something in the system was missing. And that came from talking about something really random at the bottom of a tree. And yet, as a metaphor, it kind of worked. And I think because it's a bit weird, it's memorable. And something embeds when they have that realization. They'll go away, and every time they see a mushroom, they'll chuckle about what mushrooms really are. But also remember the thinking that they did at the point when they were mulling over the issues that they had. And then that's 99% of issues in organizations come down to communications a lot of time. So, these things that they found were in their communications channels or were missing comes to the fore again. It comes back into their awareness. They don't forget so quickly, I don't think. But I'd love to do a bit of research on that, because I just think it's so interesting to see what makes us remember things. I think the quirky makes us think and also makes us remember, as opposed to mundane, which I don't want to say trees are mundane, but they're kind of normal. We see them all the time. We don't think about fungus all the time. We don't think about worms or woodlice or other little things that live in our environments and share our environments with us, that actually we probably could learn a thing from.
I apologise if you can hear my dogs barking. That's on the recording just now. The reason why is that a fighter jet just flew past our cottage.
I love it.
Because that's what happens when you live up a mountain in Scotland. Fighter jets fly past below the height of the cottage, which is what's just happened, which is why I just looked off to the left, because I was like, in about 2 seconds time, my dogs are going to start barking. So apologies.
I'm just hoping the phone doesn't ring, because mine will howl when the phone rings. So...
But yeah, that is just such an amazing metaphor, and the reason why I was laughing away is because I love learning about mushrooms as well, and I go mushroom foraging, and I've been on a couple of courses, and I have a bookshelf over there with about 6 different books about mushrooms and mushroom identification. And it's one of those things, if it's something that it connects with you personally, either because it's something you enjoy yourself, or as you said, it's a memorable conversation, because not many people have conversations about mushrooms and fungal networks, but when you do, it's something to remember. And I I struggle to find whether that you can have those kinds of meaningful and memorable conversations indoors. I mean, you could find a way to connect it, but physically having it there to talk about in front of you at the base of a tree, I think it's I mean, I'm imagining it now as you were discussing it as well. So it's a wonderful image and a shared memory. Thank you.
And I'd love, just total coincidence, on Sunday evening after a particularly chilly mountain bike ride, I curled up on the sofa to watch the film Fantastic Fungi, which was released in 2019. So I don't know if you've come across it. The imagery, the visuals are absolutely phenomenal. There's a lot of slow motion and of the mushrooms kind of coming up, and then like computer imagery of the networks that run underneath the trees as well. So I would very much recommend, if you've not seen it, to just kind of
we'll be looking that up.
Yeah, no, it's a good 18 minutes watch, definitely. Fantastic Fungi for both of you and the listeners as well to check out. So thinking about our listeners who might be interested in venturing outdoors and thinking about their coaching skill set and other skills as well, what would you recommend people do, or maybe finely tune, before they actually do step outdoors?
I don't know, it sort of suggests that there's something special that you need to do differently when you're outside. And I think one of the first lessons I really learned, and it was more the marketing, but it was quite a useful lesson to me, was that it's not all about nature. It's about your client, it's about their needs, it's about what they need to work through. And you are still coaching. You are still a coach. You're choosing to use nature as one of your tools. It's a tool in your box. It's a pretty big one, but it's one of the methods you can use, one of the environments you can coach in. So I don't know there's anything specific other than being a little bit more aware when you are out, if you want to step out, of what's around you and how you might use that. So reading a little bit, I think there's some really great tomes on that. I'd love to reel them off now. They're on the bookshelf over there. Maybe in the show notes we can add some reading materials that would be really useful, because there's a few I can add to that list. Just to build that appreciation of what is out there, and actually maybe spend some time, if you are interested to go out. I mean, maybe if you can go out with an outdoor coach, or just somebody that goes out and does like some forest bathing, so the Shirin-yoku, or spends time in a more, I suppose, meditative way in outdoor settings, purely so that you can notice for yourself what's there, and you're a little bit forewarned and forearmed as to what maybe to expect for other people, because you'll notice when you get cold, when you get uncomfortable, when you might find that something, that's not nice for me, so therefore with a client, be okay with that. Not to say you don't do it, but it means you can forewarn your clients that that's a thing that's happening. So lumpy roots, and make sure they wear the right footwear, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's more around sort of recceing safe places to do it. If you're lucky enough to have parks, that's a brilliant way to start. So around here, it's not somewhere I can easily get to. I mean, I do have a park down the road, but you can walk about 5k if you do 80 laps on it. It's pretty tiny. So I tended to go straight outdoors, but then, finding locations that, have things like parking, make it easy for your clients to come and meet you and be there with you. Make sure it's safe. So I love National Trust locations and English Heritage, those kind of places, because quite often they've got a wider estate as well as kind of formal gardens and the like. Or places like Durham Park, which that's on not quite on the doorstep, but up near the M4. Yes, you have to pay to get in, but there's some lovely pathways. It's quite flat in the main until you get to the middle bit, and it's really steep. But you can stay on the flat bits if you felt like it. So you can kind of do some recce's around some locations that you feel would be okay for the clients that you're targeting. And then, there's a little bit more research to do once you get clients that want to do it, because some will be braver. Some might want to go on a bit of a yomp up a hill. Others want to have a nice wander around the park and sit on the bench and talk. And I couldn't say do one particular thing ahead of heading out, other than spend some time out there yourself and make sure you're okay with it.
I think that's really key, isn't it? And a couple of other people we've spoken about have said similar things in terms of it's about preparation. It's about yourself as an individual, making sure you know where you're going, you have an idea of the terrain and stuff, and you've experienced it yourself. And as we said on other podcasts, the aim of this podcast really is to encourage coaches to try this out and look into it and find out more about it. We're not necessarily suggesting that tomorrow you just take your first coachee outside without even thinking about it. What we're trying to do is really encourage people to make that do that preparation in advance and really think about what they're planning to do. And then over time, those sorts of things become second nature. It just takes a bit of preparation in advance. Now, one of the other topics we wanted to talk to you about today was the idea of kind of the sort of the wider system of nature. So I think, there's a lot of research out there about systems thinking in coaching and using a wider system within the coaching environment. And the great thing about Mother Nature is, I mean, you are in the world, you're outside, you're in that wider system. How does this come up in conversations, in your coaching conversations? How is that kind of expanse and the sort of the sense of openness and the wider system around the coaches? How does that come into the coaching conversation?
Yeah, I'm trying to think now if I can think of an example. Actually, I was out with somebody the other day, and he was trying to we were looking at sort of future visions. He was trying to plan for something in a couple of years' time. And he couldn't really get himself into the headspace of what he needed to do to get there, what he really sort of needed to plan it out. So it's something that I think actually Danon gave me. We did some training ages ago, something they called Merlin, where you stand in the future and look back. So I think there's an NLP technique quite similar as well, sort of timelining. So we used what was effectively a path, a stone path through a woodland, and said, right, okay, that tree is 2022, the end of 2022. So if you go and stand at that tree, you've succeeded, you've got everything you possibly wanted from that, example you've just given me. What's around you? What can you feel? What can you notice? And a couple of times actually he said, oh, yeah, that tree over there, that looks quite cheerful. That would be all my friends going, yeah. So he was using, I didn't prompt him to use the environment, he just kind of noticed what was around him. That was quite interesting because I kind of wanted him to imagine it. I hadn't thought beyond saying use the actual trees at that point. And then we used the sort of stepping backwards. So, okay, come one tree down. That's 2 or 3 months before that end game. What are you doing then? And what are you doing then? And until we got to the first 100 days. And suddenly he's like, I know what I need to do now because I can't do any of that until I do this. And so he kind of got his thoughts into that sort of order. I mean, the point of the Merlin is that, at the top of the hill, you can see all the paths up, which you can't see from the bottom. So you get an awful lot more view of what's possible. And again, having that space, which you couldn't do in a room. Couldn't do that in the meeting room, certainly couldn't do it on Zoom, I don't think. You have to be really creative, I think, to try and do that, and maybe some VR in the future, maybe. But no, for me, it was about physically going and standing there and embodying that feeling and really getting into the sense of you've succeeded and achieved. And that sort of embeds the vision, the ambition. And then making yourself walk back through. Actually, funnily enough, when I first learned this, they said, oh, find a thing to plan with it. I planned my MSc with it. And it really weird. I really love it as a tool because it worked for that. To get on it in the first place and fund it and everything else, but also to get through it and out the other side with a decent outcome. So, I know it works, but that was one I did on paper. And actually going and physically standing and timelining it felt more powerful. And he reported afterwards, he felt it was really he hadn't seen things that way before. And also if you've got open spaces and then some rocks lying around, you could do work with constellations. You can encourage people to look at, somebody looked at a tree the other day and said, oh, I think that one's just like me. And so what do you mean? Because I think it was a Douglas fir or something, but all it had was a few little fronds at the top, nothing else. It was almost naked all the way up. I went, okay, that doesn't look all that healthy to me, but correct me here. He said, no, that's resilience, that is. I said, okay, that's brilliant. I love that because he's like, that one's determined to keep living no matter what. Like, okay, what a lovely way to look at a tree, a half-dead Douglas. So it's amazing what, and I'm never not surprised by what coaches come up with themselves. So that's one thing I did learn massively this year is trust the environment to give them some thinking. I don't have to have all the prompts and all the answers and all the, look at this and think about that. Actually, an awful lot of it does come from the coachee. They'll look at things and just notice stuff that you couldn't even imagine because you're not in their brain.
And that is part of the magic of coaching, and having an insight into someone else's world. I always find it an absolute honor, and my clients flummox and astound me in equal measure, kind of time and time again. And thinking kind of back to how you onboard a client, and you're setting the scene about outdoor coaching, getting to know them, their likes and the dislikes, and what makes them tick, what their learning styles are. Like, how do you integrate that as you start the process?
I suppose it's quite nice that most come to me knowing that that's what I do and that's what I offer. So it's not something that I've never started with an embedded set of coaching clients that I've always done Zooms with, or we've always been indoors. I've launched straight in. I mean, my business is called Coaching in Nature, so it kind of, there's a bit of a clue in the title, I suppose, it gives it away. But having those conversations has been quite interesting. And again, logistics of where you go and when you get there and how it works. Quite often we'll do a coaching session online first and have a bit of a Zoom session. Sometimes it's just the contracting or the discovery session, sort of half an hour. Other times we do a bit of contracting and then we're straight out there. So it very much depends on the client and the sort of space they're in and their eagerness. And what is nice is, I think, walking shoulder to shoulder and actually contracting while walking actually works quite well. We do a little bit, obviously, to start with. You've got to get those things out of the way, but done, so that we're really clear what's to expect. But actually, always being able to come back to that contract and shift it if you need to, adjust it if they're going down a different tangent and it's a useful tangent for them to follow. That's something that they want to explore further in the way that you would if you were coaching indoors. There's no difference there. I think for those that I have coached purely, there's a couple that I've only coached on Zoom, nothing else. Even then it's been down to logistics. We just haven't been able to get the time, or the weather's been really unkind in terms of the timing, and we've ended up on Zoom. But even they're keen to try it. They like to get out there and give it a go. I've not had one yet to say, we'll never want to do that again. And that's quite interesting. I find that I always thought it'd be at least one or two where they got a bit soggy, or actually that's only happened once where we got wet, but or it was a bit cold. It was even too hot. I've had one walk that was really, really quite stinky hot. So you just suddenly think, well, that's quite something. Not one client to go, oh, can we go on Zoom next time? I didn't really like that. And it may happen still. I don't know whether you guys have felt that before. You've had a client just go, no, not for me.
I've had one who was a client that I met in London. And it was one of those, I don't know, I find as a coach, if you get invited to work with somebody and it's not necessarily their choice, it's their manager's choice, I find the dynamic is a little bit how you kind of integrate yourselves in that. So we had initial conversation just by phone, actually. Second, we then went outdoors, and for her it was just too much of a sensory overload. She couldn't walk and take everything in and was quite overwhelmed by it all. So we then had a second session, and very much I invited her to, where do you want to meet? Where do you feel comfortable? And she chose a cafe. This is Shoreditch, near to the office. And she was in her element. She was just sat there chatting away and la 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 la. She was on a roll. And whereas for me, interestingly, as a coach, I found that environment, sometimes the acoustics in some places can be quite, the noise like reverberates around. And for me, I found that quite overwhelming. So it was just, I thought the contrast between the two, and how we do all as individuals, we have such a unique way of processing the sensory input to us and how we make sense of that. And actually, when it comes to kind of processing on a mental and emotional and intuitive level, how can we kind of set ourselves up so that we can access those states? And clearly for her, being outside with everything that was going on wasn't possible, whereas being stationary indoors, she was in her element. So it is a really just kind of poignant point to remember as a coach, as a client, and just appreciate how things can change as well.
For me, this links back a bit to what we were saying before about if you're trying outdoor coaching for the first time or are interested in it. I love nature. I'm outdoors as much as I possibly can be, and I absolutely love animals. And so whenever I'm out, I'm constantly going, oh, look, a squirrel, or oh, look, a bird, or, there's a buzzard, or there's a whatever. And so when I actually go outdoors to coach, I actually have to do a bit of mindfulness before to calm my brain down so that I don't get, I'm not the one sitting there going, oh, but look at that, and obviously distracting from the thought processes of my coachee. So again, that's something to think about. If you do really have an affinity for nature, it's about, how are you placed within that coaching conversation and within nature, and what do you need to do as the coach to make sure you're present and listening for the coachee, and not necessarily there for a personal, moment with nature. You're there for your coachee to help them with their situation. So for me, it's very much a case of having to kind of almost switch my nature antenna off a little bit, or dampen it down a little bit, because otherwise it would affect my ability to actively listen. So it's a really interesting point, actually, the sensory overload, or the ability to sense nature around us. We mentioned a little bit, you've mentioned nature a couple of times already, and it is interesting how some people are put off by it, and some people experience it and then realise it's really not a bad thing, and it's actually quite nice sometimes to go out on a really cold day, or a really rainy day, or a really blustery day. But as the coach, when you're outside, what sort of things do you carry with you, sort of more from a very practical perspective? Do you have a kit bag that you carry with you, and what sort of items do you have with you so you're prepared and you're making sure that you are able to deal with whatever situation might occur whilst you're coaching?
Yeah, I have a backpack, and there's some stock items that pretty much never. And there's a few items in there that I think I never want to have to get out, like the first aid kit. I mean, that's in there all the time. It's nothing high end. I don't carry splints or anything like that, but it's a basic first aid kit like you'd have indoors. I carry a few extra of those little foil blankets because they come in such a tiny little pouch. And they're brilliant to, if you need to sit on it, but they keep the rain off, you can wrap them around people. So you could have 3 or 4 of those without them adding really anything significant to the weight of your pack. I always have water with me, whether it's for drinking, whether it's for myself, or whether it's to wash a wound out just in case somebody sort of scuffs a knee or something like that. A fully charged up mobile phone, which again is generally for pictures, but it's there, and should we need it. Although I think where Anna Marie and I went up at Alfred's Tower, phones don't work well up there, but you can get a glimpse of a signal creep, so you can actually send an emergency text. And I've test run up there with a couple of the apps, the OS Locate, so the Where Am I app, and What 3 Words as well. So you can, alert emergency services to where you are should there be an accident. Touch wood, that hasn't happened yet. I think we've had some bramble scratches, and that's about it, where someone's gone a bit too close to the shrubbery. And then I'm just trying to think what else is in there. There's usually some sort of waterproof or sun lotion or a hat, depending on the weather. If it's a bit iffy, I will always carry waterproofs. If it looks like it might be a bit hot and sunny, I'll always chuck a little mini thing of sun lotion in there for my nose, basically. But if anyone else needs it, I've got it. It's one of those things that I'm not averse to sharing at the moment. It's all about masks and hand sanitizer as well. That's living in there right now. And last thing is there's always a snack in there. There's generally something, like a granola bar. They often carry chocolate unless the weather's too hot for it. Just because it's a nice thing to have at the end when you've had a good walk, and you've done a good job. You feel like you've done a good job, a little reward for yourself in the car. Or if there is an accident or a problem, there's some sustenance to keep somebody going until help arrives. So there's one thing that I have. I don't know how many outdoor coaches have done this. I certainly, some of the networking groups, some of the coaching walking groups, don't insist on it to be a walk leader in terms of having a first aid certificate, being a qualified first aider. I didn't feel comfortable, and my insurance doesn't insist on it either, actually, but I didn't feel comfortable taking people out with me into areas that were not like a London park where you can get help really quickly. It's not like we're going off up the Brecon Beacons, but at the same time, we could be a good half hour to an hour from the road, or a main road at least. So if there was an accident, you'd be not just providing first aid, you'd then be maintaining safety and enjoying this insofar as you could be keeping somebody comfortable and warm until help arrived, which might take a lot longer than it would, say, in the town centre. So I felt like outdoor first aid was quite important. And that's a 16-hour course, a couple £100, 16 hours. And not an easy course, I've got to say. It was pretty intense, but well worth doing. Well worth doing. It's just left me in the space that I think I can do what I need to do. I know I can do what I need to do should an emergency happen. And I wouldn't be happy to take people outside, particularly where we are, so Anna-Marie and I down here, where you might be a little bit further from immediate assistance than you would like to be in the event of something happening. You never know. You never know if someone's going to twist an ankle, or I hate to think if anyone has a heart condition. And there is an element in the contracting, making sure that someone declares any health conditions before you take a walk. And there's some things to ask around that. There's some contracting to do, like physical contracting, like paper, and just calling out the risks before they make that decision to go out there. But it's not a blocker. It's just something that you have in your metaphorical kit bag as well as your actual kit bag, to keep everyone safe. So yeah, my back lives behind the door in the office here. It's ready to go at a moment's notice. So yeah.
Thank you for giving us an insight into your backpack. And I know that you wrote a blog on it, which I think you can, we'd love to hear the link in a moment where people can find a little bit more about you. But just before that, I'd like to definitely echo your thoughts around the outdoor first aid course. 16 hours, it's 2 days, it's valid for 3 years. And it just really gives you that kind of like peace of mind, just to make sure you can look after yourself, look after your others, and ultimately who else you kind of come into contact with when you're kind of out and about. Very much when we're indoors, the first aid and health and safety at work is kind of all over the place. And actually when you're stepping outdoors into a more dynamic environment, it is, equally or just as more important. So it's kind of things, having yourself covered, and also knowing where the nearest medical facility is, for example, as well, and what you do. So thank you for kind of sharing those tips. And if there are any other resources that you would recommend, it would be fab if you could share them now, and also, signposts where our listeners can find more out about you.
Yeah, so I'll give you some stuff to put in the show notes, so that it's there for clicking and linking and all the rest of it. Certainly some books there. I think outdoor first aid, it took me a while to find a provider I could work with, or that had availability. It's quite interesting, and I think it's growing more, probably as a result of this year, more people being outside. There seems to be a bit of a growth in the first aid provision, if you like. And then, actually a lot of this stuff is actually on my website. There's a nice little segue into a bit of a plug for that. So I'm at www.coachinnature.co.uk. In there is a link to my podcast, which has a couple of guests on it now. I'm only just getting into having guests, so that's a new thing for me. It has some links to people that I know that aren't coaching related, but could be quite interesting, outdoor photography, that kind of stuff, if anyone's interested. My blogs are on there, so yes, the What's in My Backpack I think is on there, as well as What is Coaching, and something about resilience, and some other stuff that I think I wrote very, very early on, but is still relevant, still factual. And yeah, something about coaching and something about coaching supervision. So if you want to know more about me, that's where you'll find it.
That's great. And on the website where people will find our podcast series, we will have a link to your site and the resources that you share with us as well after we've chatted today. And we'll pop those all on there as well, so people can have a look through. And it might be things to read, it might be things to look at online. And we want to make sure that our resources are as wide-ranging as possible, so it would be great. And I do highly recommend anybody pops onto Rachel's website, because it, like as she said, there's some great blogs on there and links as well. So we do want everyone to encourage people and the network to build and for people to get in touch with you. And we would hope, if it's okay with you, Rachel, if there's any coaches or budding outdoor coaches out there who would like to chat to you a bit more about this, hopefully they can contact you after today's podcast as well, and pick your brain.
Yes, my brain is ripe for picking.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for today, Rachel. It's been absolutely lovely. We've talked about some great topics around the connection with nature, how you yourself ended up in as an outdoor coach through your love and your affinity with nature, and with the sort of the wider system, as well as some of the tools and techniques that you might utilise whilst outside, using metaphors and analogies in a way that's a little bit different to what's possible indoors as well. So thank you so much for sharing your amazing insights and some great little stories as well, little anecdotal stories. We love those. So it's been wonderful. For further podcast recordings, please go to our website, coaching-outdoors.com. That's coaching-outdoors.com. And as we said, other resources are on there as well for people to look at after today's session. So all it takes me now to say thank you very much, Rachel. Really appreciate your time today, and hopefully we will see you soon.